Hi everyone, my name is John Buszkiewicz. I work for the Michigan Department of Natural Resources at the Waterford Field Office for the Lake Erie Management Unit in Oakland County. I've been the Michigan lead field biologist for the Lake Erie Grass Carp Response Program since 2018, which was the first year we had full-time dedicated field crews for grass carp removal efforts, but we also had seasonal crews in 2016 and 17. All the work I'm going to share with you today is in response to priorities established by the Lake Erie Committee. The Lake Erie Committee is made up of fisheries management agencies around Lake Erie, working under the umbrella of the Great Lakes Fishery Commission. I'd also like to begin by mentioning that this is a huge collaborative project involving many partners, agencies, universities, states, and provinces, which aims to use science-based adaptive approaches to respond to and evaluate the grass carp invasion in western Lake Erie. Shown on this slide are only a handful of the people involved from the Michigan DNR, Ohio DNR, United States Fish and Wildlife Service, Great Lakes Fishery Commission, Michigan State University, University of Toledo, and the United States Geological Survey. But I'd like to thank all of the co-authors and other people listed here and all the other agencies who have been part of large response efforts, decision-making, and associated research projects. Finally, the biggest thanks to our funding source, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, which is the federal grant program responsible for allowing us to effectively implement this program on such a large scale. So let's get started. I'll be addressing the following questions. What is a grass carp and why do we care? What are we doing about grass carp? And by we, I mean the Lake Erie Committee and Michigan DNR in collaboration with other partners. And lastly, what do we hope to accomplish? More specifically, what are the goals and objectives of the Grass Carp Response Program in Lake Erie? To answer these questions, I'll give a quick background about grass carp in North America and the Great Lakes. I'll describe some initial removal efforts and telemetry projects that were implemented in response to the grass carp invasion. Then I'll summarize the implementation of the Lake Erie Committee strategy as it relates to grass carp in Lake Erie. So these four invasive carp species were historically brought from Asia to the States in the 1960s to manage for nuisance vegetation and algal blooms in private ponds and lakes. This eventually led to escapees from flooding events and potential releases into natural waterways. These carp species currently pose a threat, some more than others, to the Great Lakes. No black or silver carp have been captured in the Great Lakes. However, 3 bighead carp were captured in Lake Erie in the late 90s. While a couple of grass carp have been detected in the Great Lakes since the mid-80s, a large increase of commercial fishing capture reports in Lake Erie within the last decade have occurred, which elevated the concern of potential risk of colonization in the Great Lakes. However, it's important to note that grass carp are very different from bighead and silver carp in terms of their potential effects on aquatic ecosystems. To prevent new introductions of grass carp and the potential for establishment, most Great Lakes states and Canada, which are the red areas in the figure, have prohibited the live possession of both fertile and sterile grass carp. Other states, in yellow for example, restrict possession of only fertile fish, while the green states still allow stocking of both fertile and sterile grass carp. Michigan implemented this prohibition on all grass carp early in 1969. I've started to touch a bit on the history of invasive carps in the Great Lakes. So what's the problem and why do we care? Well, grass carp have received a lot of attention because of their potential to have negative impacts on our Great Lakes ecosystems if populations were to become established. They are voracious plant eaters and could disrupt critical habitats and resources required for multiple life stages of native fish, birds or waterfowl, and invertebrates. They could thus negatively impact spawning, rearing, feeding, and cover for these natives. To inform the direction of management agencies as it relates to prevention and control of grass carp and current and future levels of risk, a science-based binational ecological risk assessment was conducted by several agencies, led by the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and was published in 2017. They evaluated several factors, for example, the arrival, survival, establishment, and spread of grass carp based on available habitat for feeding and spawning, water temperature, and movement, among others. It was concluded that fertile grass carp were very likely to establish self-sustaining populations in Lake Erie by the year 2022. Also in Lakes Huron, Michigan, and Ontario by 2027. This would lead to Lakes Erie, Huron, and Michigan likely experiencing increased ecological consequences within the next 20 to 50 years. However, the conclusion of the risk assessment that grass carp will expand in Lake Erie and the other Great Lakes is based on the assumption that nothing is done, which is exactly why we are taking on this response effort. We want to change that trajectory. This is especially important to consider because of the billions of dollars in revenue every year from commercial and recreational fishing, boating, hunting, wildlife watching, and beaches and lakefront properties. The Great Lakes Fishery Commission valued the Great Lakes commercial, recreational, and tribal fisheries at more than $7 billion annually, supporting more than 75,000 jobs. A substantial establishment of grass carp could lead to extensive dollars in damages in the Great Lakes over the next 40 years, which was concluded by Hayter's study in 2019. In addition to the increasing amount of fertile grass carp captures in Lake Erie, evidence of successful reproduction has been documented by researchers from the United States Geological Survey and the University of Toledo, which indicates a very high risk threat of establishment. Starting in 2012, 6 wild origin juveniles were captured in the Sandusky River. From 2015 to 2019, fertilized grass carp eggs were collected in the Sandusky River. Eggs and larvae have also been documented on the Maumee River during various years. These findings have undoubtedly elevated the concern of establishment of grass carp in Lake Erie. So what are we doing about it? Starting in 2014, the Michigan DNR, in collaboration with other partner agencies, began to assess the risk of grass carp and address knowledge gaps such as reproductive capacity, tributary use, and early life history. The binational risk assessment was also conducted during this time. Michigan and Ohio DNRs led initial targeted multi-agency planned action responses, which you can see in the top picture the amount of effort that was put in. We also began to implement partner-supported response actions such as commercial fishing to help reporting and to remove grass carp from Lake Erie. These multi-agency planned action responses were a product of the Conference of Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Governors and Premiers Mutual Aid Agreement implemented to capture and remove grass carp. However, the first large-scale response exercise conducted in 2014 proved to be quite costly and ineffective. Over a 3-day period, with 96 hours of electrofishing, 53 gill net lifts, and 3 commercial seine hauls, only 2 grass carp were collected and 2 others were observed. It was very hard to capture these fish, and there were many unknowns for where and when to focus removal efforts. We had to implement our response actions more effectively and refine our strategy. This led to a structured decision-making process starting in 2016, which provided a framework for implementation and evaluation of Lake Erie grass carp removal efforts. These happen between the Lake Erie Committee, federal agencies, and universities, which uses available information and stakeholder values in conjunction with a formal structure for a transparent and collaborative process. The purpose of these SDM workshops are to first, establish goals and objectives using the best available information, and second, collaboratively carry out response actions. This process allows for addressing key uncertainties such as tributary use and movement, gear efficiency, abundance, and early life history information to inform future control strategies. In order to more effectively inform future control strategies, it was critical to understand large-scale grass carp movements and potential areas of aggregation in the Great Lakes. Therefore, researchers from Michigan State University paired up with biologists from Michigan DNR and Ohio DNR to evaluate tributary use and movement of grass carp in Lake Erie. A study by Harris and colleagues informed the grass carp team of high-use areas which suggested to focus removal efforts to the Sandusky River and Plum Creek, while also targeting the Maumee and Detroit rivers. The figures shown here are of a transmitter implant surgery. the current extensive array of acoustic receivers deployed throughout Lake Erie, and the spatial results of the tagging study identifying locations with the most grass carp detections. Tagging studies also helped evaluate the risk of grass carp spreading to other parts of Lake Erie and other Great Lakes. The state of Michigan, along with multiple state and federal agencies, received federal funding from the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative in order to implement grass carp response efforts directed by the Lake Erie Committee for a 5-year period. These response plans follow recommendations from the collaborative SDM workshops to carry out adaptive management strategies using science-based approaches to inform removal efforts. The two main goals of this response plan are to track population trends of grass carp throughout time and remove grass carp from Lake Erie during response efforts. In order to monitor population trends using catch per unit effort, we are using standardized response protocols within the high-use areas depicted in this map on the right, which were informed by telemetry movement data. These responses are conducted on a monthly basis at each of these sites using fishing gears determined to have the best capture rates, which are 600-foot trammel nets set adjacent to shore and electrofishing inside and around the nets to help herd fish into them. We're also implementing diverse, innovative response actions to maximize removal efforts. For example, conducting sustained responses at night, collaborating with commercial fishers using seine and trap nets on Lake Erie, utilizing real-time receiver alerts and fine-scale movement data to inform detailed response tactics, maintaining relationships with avid bow fishers who assist with removals, implementing strategic response actions in higher-risk Ohio waters during high-flow spawning events, and experimenting with other fishing gears such as baited nets and set lines. As a result of these response actions, there has been 229 fertile grass carp caught since 2012, which really highlights the outcomes of these efforts. This figure shows all the individual captures capable of reproduction, which were mostly caught in the Western Basin, in the Sandusky and Maumee Rivers, Plum Creek, Stony Point, Luna Pier, and Detroit River. A few have also been caught in the Central and Eastern Basins. To help further illustrate a few major outcomes of implementing grass carp response actions since 2014, shown here are two graphs highlighting grass carp captures and associated response efforts conducted by management agencies. The graph on the left shows the total number of grass carp captures indicated by the blue bars and the primary y-axis, compared to the percentage of fish that were caught by response agencies indicated by the orange line and the secondary axis. You probably noticed the large increase in agency-captured fish after hiring full-time grass carp response crews in 2018. Of course, this wouldn't have been possible without the increased effort and federal funding since the first planned action responses in 2014 and 17. The bar graph on the right shows the total number of agency net lifts in blue, stacked with electrofishing hours in orange. As you can imagine, the huge increase in effort was after hiring grass carp crews in 2018 and the purchase of a new boat and gear. So what do we hope to accomplish as a result of the Lake Erie Grass Carp Response Program? Specifically, the objectives are to prevent further introductions of grass carp into Lake Erie waters, monitor for the presence and expansion of grass carp in Lake Erie and its connecting waters, maximize life history information gained to refine the spatially explicit population model, which allows us to project grass carp abundance and evaluate various management response scenarios. And lastly, that we implement a control strategy that is linked with current knowledge of distribution and habitat use of grass carp in Lake Erie. Because researchers from the USGS and the University of Toledo are focused on early life history information, this portion of the response program focuses on removal of adult fish with the target goal of removing 390 fertile fish every year. The response actions that I touched on earlier help address those four main project objectives. During the current phase of Lake Erie Grass Carp Adapted Response, starting in 2017, management agencies began to increase capacity of full-time dedicated grass carp response crews. This development made it possible to implement consistent large-scale coordinated removal efforts during spawning periods, gear studies to evaluate relative effectiveness, and utilize fine-scale and real-time receivers to inform targeted removals in high-use areas. Standardized sustained response protocols, or in other words, consistent sampling methods at the same sites repeatedly, are being implemented by all response crews in order to track population trends of grass carp over time. In addition, there are a multitude of other research projects that are being conducted by various agencies and universities to help address critical knowledge gaps. Environmental DNA surveillance, otolith microchemistry, egg collection, and telemetry continue to be invaluable tools for researchers to help evaluate reproduction and recruitment and to inform managers of the best ways to implement response efforts. Furthermore, we will formally evaluate the use of baits and attractants for increased capture efficiency and plan to implement and evaluate a seasonal barrier to inhibit grass carp spawning on the Sandusky River, which was deemed the most effective management scenario from the population model. Finally, I'd just like to bring up a few things we've learned about the Lake Erie grass carp program over the last few years. It's important to understand that science-based responses are necessary to maximize removal of grass carp. Response efforts need to be both strategic and sustained in order to have the best results. This requires that the timing, location, capture gears, and data being collected are all consistent and comparable. Research that fills knowledge gaps also greatly increases the likelihood of captures. Most importantly, that continued federal funding is critical for implementing a diverse and highly effective control strategy. I'd also like to use this chance as an opportunity to express that anyone, especially anglers, can assist with reporting any detections or captures of grass carp. We would love your help. Please be aware of what fish species are in your bait bucket and make sure your fishing buddies are doing the same. Most importantly, don't ever dump your bait when you're done fishing for the day. If you think you caught a grass carp, keep the fish and report it using the link below. If possible, please take one or more photos of the invasive species you are reporting. Also make note of the location and date and time of the observation. This will aid in the verification of your report. You can also support the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and our efforts to contain and prevent colonization of grass carp. Feel free to learn more by using the link to the State of Michigan's invasive species website provided here. In summary, I hope you have all learned a bit more about the invasive grass carp issue in the Great Lakes and the huge amount of removals, responses, and research that are being implemented to help prevent expansion and address knowledge gaps to eventually or potentially eradicate grass carp from the Great Lakes. Again, my name is John Buszkiewicz with the Michigan Department of Natural Resources Lake Erie Management Unit. Thank you for your attention, and I'd love to answer any questions you may have concerning grass carp in Lake Erie. Thank you.